Hi, and welcome to the Property Development Derisked podcast, where we talk all things pre-construction, everything before a spade goes into the ground. We get the experts in to help you keep your projects on track. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the role of SME house builders in the UK housing market, and specifically how they can support us to provide the much-needed capacity that the sector needs. Today, we have Charlie Scherer joining us from Helix Partnership Homes. Charlie has over 35 years' experience working in housing development and contracting, including over 10 years leading national operations for two Tier 1 house builders. He's now the co-founder of Helix Partnership Homes and has also advised a number of SMEs and modular house builders over the last 5 years. Hi, Charlie, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Gonzalo, and thanks for inviting me to join you today.
No problem. And just to start off, I thought for the audience it'd be really helpful for you to provide a bit of a overview and background of kind of your career and where you've worked previously and how you've got to where you are in kind of founding and co-founding Helix Homes.
Okay, thanks, Gonzalo. I started in the industry straight from school back in 1988. So I've been in the built environment now for nearly 35 years, and more specifically, and most of that time has been spent in being involved in building houses in a variety of roles, mainly across, as you mentioned earlier, two Tier 1 national builders, of which the most recent corporate position that I held was leading a housing division building 2,000 homes annually across the country from Liverpool through the Midlands into London and down into Brighton. We had around 45 outlets at peak. In 2017, I embarked on, I guess, what I would call a portfolio career, which was involved in advising SME house builders and modular house builders. And at that point in time, I felt that they were probably the two segments of our house building sector that were underrepresented and could make the biggest difference in closing the capacity gap against the UK's sort of national housing target. And alongside those roles, I joined some old colleagues of mine at Helix who had set up their construct business in 2016, initially as a non-exec director. And as that construct business grew, we started to talk about utilising some of our capital into doing some more land-led development work. And in March of 2022, we launched Helix Partnership Homes, which was a joint venture between myself and the team at Helix. And I switched then from a non-exec role to a full-time executive role, leading that business, which is known as Helix Partnership Homes.
Yeah, excellent. They brought you in. You were going for your portfolio career, and they pulled you in and convinced you to come on board.
They did, albeit, to be honest, it didn't take much convincing because Nick and Carl, who run that business, are people who I've known and worked alongside for many years, and I think one of the attractive propositions of working with Nick and Carl is not only are they very capable work colleagues who I respect, but they're also friends. And sometimes there's a fine line between friendship and being business colleagues, but that's never ever got in the way of us working really well together. And we're now 5 years on from my initial involvement. The construct business has grown and generally doubled its turnover year on year. And that's just been a superb platform for us to be able to do what we want to do in homes.
Yeah, excellent. Awesome. Exciting. And you mentioned when you were talking about kind of advising SMEs and modular house builders, you mentioned the kind of the aim of yours to help build up capacity and help deliver the number of homes that we need. Is that something that's driven you? Is that something that made you wanted to support this part of the industry in terms of smaller developers and modular manufacturers?
It absolutely is. I think I think one of the things I'd make clear during our conversation is that there is a place in our sector for a whole range of house builders and service providers. So, I don't think any one segment of the sector is any more important than the other. It's about an integrated approach of tier one national house builders, housing contractors, partnership builders, MMC house builders, and of course SMEs, which I'm spending 100% of my time, working in that particular component currently. I think when I go back 5 years, you actually look at the structure of the house building sector then, and I don't think it's changed too much now, but it is predominantly tier one national house builders and residential contractors, together with some larger regional builders who might have evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. And when you actually look at our fulfillment against the government target of building 300,000 homes, we're woefully behind that. There's been a chronic undersupply for many, many years. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that the SME part of UK housing delivery has really dropped off since around 1988, actually. So coincidentally, when I came into the industry. And at that point, there was a raft of SME house builders, probably responsible for 40% of housing delivery annually. And in 2017, when I started my portfolio career, we were down to 12%. Now, quite simply, if we just close that gap by 20%, we would meet the national housing target. So if SMEs delivered 20% more, we'd fulfill that target. So there's got to be a space and a place for encouraging new SMEs to come in and help close that gap.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And I also think that by SMEs dropping out of the market and having more tier one house builders and larger house builders, it also affects the type of sites that are coming forward. And what you're seeing is there's a bigger focus on the larger sites that work for the business models of the large house builders, but the medium and small sites, especially public sector, sometimes don't get put forward or nothing happens with them. One, because the large house builders are not interested, and secondly, there isn't enough, or sometimes there isn't sufficient SMEs to be able to provide that, to deliver that. Or mainly the landowner just won't put it forward to SMEs because they feel like their time is better placed delivering 1,000 homes than 25 or 40 or 50.
I agree, and there's a whole host of views and opinions that I could offer on those points, Gonzalo. I think perhaps just picking out a couple. The smaller to medium sites, and you could be contemplating, I think, single developments of maybe up to 40 or 50 homes. When I talk about small to medium sized sites, I think they've largely been vacated by, and quite understandably, by national house builders and by larger regionals. And they've been vacated, I think, for two reasons. Smaller regionals grow because they will have an ambition to grow, and to grow, you tend to look at larger outlets, and national house builders will naturally look at larger outlets of over, say, 150, 200 homes, but also they have a strategic land.
Sorry, Charlie, by outlets, do you mean, is that sites?
Yeah, number of sites, developments, actual sites themselves. But the national house builders also have strategic land teams who are, looking over the medium to long, sometimes very long term, to be able to bring through the planning system strategic schemes that are very considerable in scale. And my view on that is that regionally and locally, some of the smaller schemes have not become attractive for credible reasons to the medium-sized regionals and the larger tier ones, because they're perhaps not economic enough to work for them and for their infrastructure. And there are different means of pipeline supply for new developments, and it's sort of vacated that that scale of development for the smaller regionals and the new SMEs to pick up on. And I think that's really complementary because the one thing we cannot do, or we could, but where we are at the stage in our evolution as a partnership developer, is invest what capital we can generate into strategic land, because we know that's a long game. And where we are as an SME at the moment is any capital that we have to invest, we want to invest it in working up schemes that are of a modest scale, because if they're of a modest or smaller scale, generally there's modest or smaller cash resources required. So whereas the larger tier one house builders have much deeper pockets than us to invest in strategic land over the longer term, we're much more interested in looking at smaller sites, potentially that have a principle of development in place or have a planning ticket in place. And what that means is that we can invest what we have quickly, and we can turn those schemes very, very quickly, and we can deliver new homes quickly, because generally they're on a smaller scale, which should mean that you can build them at a faster pace.
Which is what the government wants, right? They want to get homes built sooner rather than later. I think strategic land that also is kind of part of land banking, isn't it? Where you buy a site and you might wait 5 or 10 years until the values go up in time to actually build it out, which is another reason for slow delivery and lack of capacity, is because one of the practices is to drip feed projects to make sure that the values that you're getting from the schemes are as high as possible. With SMEs, it's kind of an additional benefit for thinking about public sector landowners, is they can partner with SMEs that for their business models, they need to get these properties built and sold in order to make money and then buy the next one.
Yes, and so if you look on a broader basis, you could have a strategic site that has the potential, let's say, to deliver 500 homes a year with one operator, with one developer. Or you could have a conurbation that has a very proactive local planning authority in terms of support for new homes, and therefore a number of schemes that have secured a planning consent in fulfillment of local housing targets, but across 5 or 6 sites, maybe more of an average size of maybe anything from 20 up to 100 plots. But you have 5 or 6 different developers or house builders or partnership builders building out those sites, or outlets, as I called them earlier. I think the difference between the two is that with the latter model, you don't necessarily have competing products, because each one of those smaller house builders will probably have their own niche in terms of the product that they will be building. And therefore, you're not competing necessarily for sales, because you're offering a different type of home or a different type of product to a different type of market. Not always the same, but there's always going to be overlap. The fear, to be fair, from, I guess, the national house builders is that if there's an outlet that's got 500 homes of a very similar product, then there's too much saturation in terms of market demand. There are options, of course, to have a complementary product in that regard. But I think the point I'm making is that SMEs will think very carefully about what's going to sell, and when I say what's going to sell, that's whether that's a market sale home or in fact an affordable home, because what we're seeing at the moment, and something that we're doing a lot, is working in partnership with housing associations to sell 100% of what we're building for affordable housing, which is really fantastic. But again, that creates complementary demand, which means you'll see, hopefully, all of those sites in any one conurbation delivering a lot quicker than potentially if it was all on one larger development.
Yeah, and And are you saying kind of a different tenure split by different SME providers rather than one developer that's potentially building and having a few tenures that will essentially have issues when bringing it to the market?
I think there's a whole host of aspects that differentiate any one development. So tenure split is one. The typologies of the types of homes is another. So whether it's predominantly apartments, whether it's predominantly smaller family homes or larger family homes. And I think something as well that's beginning to emerge is also the difference in the approach that house builders either choose or not choose to take in terms of sustainability. So for example, one of the things that we've decided to do at Helix Partnership Homes is not embrace the use of fossil fuels. So we don't use fossil fuels on our sites. Where possible, we try to embrace the standards of future home standards. So our first scheme that we've got up in the Cotswolds is broadly future home standard compliant. It doesn't have gas boilers. We have air source heat pumps. So our product there is very much about reducing bills for occupiers, and those houses in the Cotswolds are 15 social rented homes. So we're assisting the residents there with their energy bills. But what we're also doing is we're providing sort of super insulated fabric first homes, which is going to reduce the consumption of incoming energy in the first place. So that's another different type of product. And going back into my portfolio career, I supported a zero carbon house builder a few years back who are just not emitting any carbon at all on any of their developments through the use of technology and fabric first. Not too dissimilar to what I explained that we're doing at Morton. So when you're looking at a mix of product, it's tenure. I think it's scale, smaller sites, medium-sized sites as well, embracing sustainable technologies and different types of typologies of the homes that you're selling. So there's plenty to go at, and we have such a demand for housing in the UK at the moment. I think there's quite a broad mix of what consumers will want, and generally across that range of options that I've just spoken about. Yeah,
and I guess one of the key challenges, which I know we discussed earlier, is accessing these projects, the parcels of land, and partnering with public sector. I'd like to know your experience from kind of what you've done in the past, and also with Helix, is how SMEs can work with public sector in order to unlock these sites. What's your experience of that, and do you have any kind of advice or tips from that process?
I do. I think the first one is, if I was talking to other SMEs who and I'm sure there are many doing the similar thing to Helix Partnership Homes, but those that aren't, I would say that one of the key things is to be patient. It's and in some respects that doesn't necessarily help in terms of the accelerated delivery of new affordable homes. But I think as an SME, we have very flexible and nimble governance. If we have to allocate some capital into, or some cash into investing in a planning application or doing some surveys on some sites, I'll have a phone call with one of my colleagues, and we'll make the call within 5 minutes. We don't have a governance structure which is similar to the governance structure that we understand that housing associations and local authorities will have, and so therefore it's unlikely that you'll get a decision on something that will be as quick as the decisions that you can make, for understandable reasons. But don't get frustrated by that. I think what you have to do is, if you've got sort of short-term ambition to get some activity happening, which we have as a new SME house builder, then you've just got to broaden your reach, and have a number of conversations with a number of organisations, and over time those opportunities will drop in. Make sure you plan for that. Make sure you plan for that in terms of your own resources and in terms of your own cash. But be patient. That would be probably my first.
Yeah, you can see why it's so challenging, right? Having to have those multiple discussions, multiple relationships with different public sector parties, and all of them, they might take a long time to make decisions. So it's very hard to plan, and as a small business to arrange the finances and know when things are coming in. It's a massive challenge. What about, I know there's a scheme from the GLA and also from Homes England. So the GLA has the small sites, small builders program. The whole purpose of that is to identify small public sector land owned by public sector in London, to unlock it for kind of releasing it to SMEs that want to help deliver affordable homes. So there's that one in London. And then Homes England also has the land portal. I did check the land portal a few months back, and they kind of positioned it as a kind of solution to provide land for SMEs. But all the sites I saw on there were extremely large, so I'm not sure if that's working with SMEs yet. But yeah, have you had any experience of kind of going for and working with the small sites portal or anything like that?
Yeah. So mostly the Homes England land portal, and I mean, as a Newbury-based builder, we haven't looked in too much detail on the GLA sites program, because we're focusing generally on Newbury being our sort of epicenter, and then anywhere within around an hour and a half travel time. Yeah. But mostly outside of London. But we do enjoy, I think, a very productive relationship with Homes England, and I think a number of the interventions that Homes England have been making over the last 2 to 3 years, especially in support of SMEs, have been very welcome by us and other SMEs. And so I think there's probably two things worth mentioning that I think have been positive, and I think there's something else worth mentioning which has been a challenge, especially as a new startup SME. So let me start with the two positive parts to that. I think the first thing is the accessibility of Homes England. We have regular conversations with the appropriate teams within that organisation, and by appropriate teams I mean the land disposal teams and the funding teams, who are nothing but supportive in bringing through organisations like ours into assisting with delivery of new homes on smaller sites. And in fact, the first scheme that I mentioned earlier, Morton in the Marsh, was a direct disposal from Homes England to us, in competition, but sat outside of, it did feature on the Land Hub, but it sat outside of their dynamic procurement system, their DPS, which is their main vehicle for disposing of sites to house builder partners, and I'll come on to that. So that gave us a great start as an SME, and was in fact our first development that we've undertook within Helix Partnership Homes as a land-led opportunity. I think the other thing that's happening at the moment is the funding options that Homes England are assisting SMEs with. So you have the Home Builders Fund, which helps with financing some of the initial investment into a scheme once a scheme has started. But there's also the new sort of levelling up fund within Homes England, which assists house builders like us with our speculative costs. I think anything up to around £250,000. So, yeah, for an appropriate scheme, there's an option to go to Homes England to seek some investment from them, or a loan from them to support you through your early costs in taking the scheme through its acquisition, through its planning. And of course, given that planning has become more and more costly over the last few years in particular, that will be a great help for SMEs, not only on a single development, but also to release funds to do more. And I guess that's the main purpose of that proposition. I think on the flip side, the one thing that we see become quite an obstacle for us as a new SME is the governance around procurement, and that's both with central organisations like Homes England, but also public sector procurement generally, where frankly a track record is required over a medium length period of time to demonstrate that your organisation has delivered a number of schemes previously, and that your balance sheet is a balance sheet that is mature enough to essentially be a low risk partner for procuring authorities to work with. And I think as a new SME, you don't have those case studies, and you're building your balance sheet all the time. So if I was to make sort of one plea to the sector, it's to, and in particular, I guess boards of some of the development teams within housing associations, it's to perhaps be a little bit more pragmatic around some of the hurdles that are put in a framework through a procurement exercise, so that you can encourage more new SMEs to join, and perhaps focus a little bit more on the individuals that are involved in those businesses and their individual experience and track record, as opposed to a track record for a new company that might only be 2 years into its journey.
That is very interesting insight, and yeah, you can kind of see the challenges for new SMEs coming into the market. If you're a new SME and you want to come into the market, and you want to be able to access public sector land and support public sector to deliver against their affordable housing targets and their housing targets in general, then they want to support you, but then they only want to procure and partner with those entities that have been doing it for a long time and they've got the balance sheet. So it's kind of it doesn't really work with each other, does it? And I can see the big challenge there. So that's a very good. Yeah.
But we're seeing gradual shifts. So I talked about the Homes England site that we secured a year or so ago, which actually now has started on site. But also some conversations we're having with housing associations, where we're starting to look at their assets. And just going back to advice for other SMEs, one of my pieces of advice would be to don't be afraid to be speculative, and look at sites, even if some of them are unlikely to work, because by doing that, you can demonstrate, hopefully, the skills you have in maybe being able to unlock something that the larger house builders won't. So we are beginning to work with some housing associations on some of their smaller portfolios on their existing assets. And the conversations we're having around procurement and around governance, I think, are beginning to chime with those organisations. And there are solutions for that. And there are largely procurement compliance solutions for that. But it's just about being able to articulate those, and the housing associations being a little bit flexible against what they would have been used to of doing over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that capacity constrained local authorities and housing associations would really appreciate that external support and expertise to be looking at the stuff that they might be a little bit too busy to be looking at themselves.
You've hit the nail on the head there, Gonzalo, because we, our our USP, I suppose, is that we have very experienced people in our organisation. So, our board comprises of 4 directors with over 100 years experience in tier 1 organisations. But because we are very focused on a small number of schemes at small scale, we can bring that experience into smaller schemes that quite often, like for like, are much more complex than some of the larger schemes, because they might be garage sites with issues around existing buildings, existing services, drainage, suds, and so on. And we roll our sleeves up, and and with the help of some of the services that you provide with the surveys as well, which is really useful in getting some early knowledge on some of the aspects of the sites that we're looking at, some of the complications and some of the pre-existing conditions of those sites. What we're able to do is sort of bring that together and very quickly come up with a due diligence appraisal, and a realistic due diligence appraisal, because what we won't do is say, yes, well, we can deal with this in so many months, and we can build it out with the price that might work for you on a greenfield site. When we can't, we're very realistic about it. But more often than not, what we're seeing is that especially on existing controlled assets, where book values are low, whilst the construction costs might be higher than a small family house in a green field, it can still work economically. It can still work, and that, I think, is something that will really help housing associations and local councils on some of their smaller sites to build more homes. And I think the real difference there is that, as you said earlier, the larger house builders and the larger public organisations, their teams are quite rightly involved on the big stuff that's going to make the biggest difference to their delivery targets. Whereas we can take responsibility for the small stuff, and we can take the pain of that away from them, and come up hopefully with some very pragmatic advice on whether something is possible to do on any one of their assets, whether we can build 4 homes, 10 homes, or if we can't, and we can do that very quickly. So we're looking at a program at the moment which potentially could deliver 50 homes across around 8 or 9 sites. That started out as 13 sites and 80 homes. So you can see the attrition rate, but actually we've got to a point where more than 50% of those sites that were presented to us in the first place have more of a chance of delivering affordable housing than not. Now, I'd like to think that our input in that has made that difference, and I don't think our input has made the difference in the sense that the sites were never ready for delivery, but the fact that we were there working on them and doing some quite gritty, awkward stuff that understandably others haven't got the time to do means that we can just tip that balance.
Yeah, and we I've spoken to lots of housing associations and local authorities from what we do, and spoken to them internally, and I know the challenges that they have in terms of being able to unlock a small site and bring it forward to the market, and even potentially partner with an SME or sell it to an SME. There's a lot of time and resource that needs to go into that from a team that would potentially could be releasing a site that could deliver 500 homes or 1,000 homes. So, and that's the decision that they need to make, is, do we put this person or these people onto unlocking these sites over here, or do we keep them on these larger sites, but someone coming in externally and supporting them with that resource to be able to unlock that land and bring it forward is a massive benefit, and potentially something that's slightly untapped in the sector. And there could be some, this is me just talking now, but it could be awesome to have funding from government to pay for that speculative support, because for an SME, you need to get paid for your work. Doing speculative stuff like that, when you mentioned earlier, it takes a very long time for them to make a decision. it's quite difficult to make all of that kind of financially stand.
It does. I really agree with that point. We're seeing investment coming through on some of our speculative costs actually from housing association partners. So we're working with 2 partners at the moment that are happy to largely reimburse us for our third party costs when we're doing due diligence work. I mentioned the funding program that Homes England have. I think the quid pro quo would be that as an SME, you're putting in your sweat equity and you're putting in your own time, but to show as well, to evidence that you have a small component of skin in the game, means also it's important to you, which means your housing association or public sector partner can see that you're working really, really hard to make these schemes happen, to get a planning consent. At which point, of course, then the risk falls away. And fingers crossed, you recover your investment through whatever vehicle is used to build out those affordable homes.
Yeah. And do you have a view, Charlie, on the amount of potential on small sites to unlock capacity and delivery? Do you have kind of a high level number of what can be delivered on small brownfield sites?
Oh, I think unless I knew, all the assets, all the housing association and local council assets in the country, it'd be very, very difficult to give you a number. But I suspect the opportunity is just huge. And what will unlock that, I think, is a partnership approach. It's a partnership approach between good landlords that have good asset management skills, together with SMEs that have good development project management skills. So it's difficult to put a number on that, but I think I think the opportunity is as much as any public organisation wants it to be, and the key there is understanding the assets, doing some stock reviews, working alongside organisations like ours, to be able to pragmatically say, look, this is what is possible, and then, to be fair, put an attrition rate of probably 50% in, because 50% won't happen.
Yeah. But what happens with that 50%? The one that doesn't work?
Well, we've looked at 5 sites with one of our housing association partners. Why didn't they work? Well, I think predominantly it was some early feedback that we got from the planning authority where it wouldn't get planning support. So it was a site that was then never going to work in the first place. So I think the trick is not to look at it as a failure on something that wasn't going to work. It was a free hit, so to speak, and it's something which then will have to retain its existing use, or maybe have an enhanced use in other ways, such as biodiversity net gain, for example.
Yeah, and in terms of that point that I raised a moment ago regarding the potential capacity number of homes, I rejogged my memory and I just searched it up, and the Campaign to Protect Rural England, so it's CPRE, they did a study a few years back, and they found enough brownfield land to deliver 1 million homes. And considering that we want to deliver 300,000, and every year we're delivering around just under 200,000, that's a very big number that can help deliver what we need on these small sites. And a lot of the reasons why we're not delivering on these are things that you've eloquently mentioned over this call. But yeah, it's crazy to see that's the potential in front of us, but there's so many challenges making it so hard for SMEs to be able to support.
And it's a real shame for small sites, actually, because again, there've been some significant infrastructure investment that Homes England have placed in through local authorities over the years. The Local Authority Accelerated Construction Fund, which brings infrastructure in for larger housing projects, and I guess there must be a challenge, I think, put in, which is how can we get some infrastructure funds to some of the smaller sites, which aren't necessarily going to be as efficient when it comes to the administration of setting those up and the legal agreements. If you're looking at a 50k investment, let's say, for delivering 6 homes, how can the sector shape itself so it can become efficient in providing that financial support without turning people off because there's too much of an administrative burden to make it happen?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some smart business model that could be done there for.
I'm sure that's something. Sure, that's something you can think about, Gonzalo, for your next steps.
And looking forward, Charlie, just to kind of recap the session. Looking forward, if your kind of advice for public sector entities, so be it local authorities, housing association, or central government, firstly, how can they prepare themselves to be able to make it easier to work with SMEs and support the SME industry? And secondly, from the SME side, any additional kind of pointers of advice. Obviously, we discussed a few things already for them to make their life easier when trying to work with public sector.
So for public sector organisations, the first thing I think is to take a step back and look at their housing stock, look at the opportunity of regeneration, which is just such a fantastic model on many layers. In fact, not just housing, but health and education and jobs, and look at which, where the best opportunities are, even if those opportunities might only deliver another 10 to 15 homes over a couple of years, and decide whether you want to do something with those, whether you want to create something more than you have, whether that's done in a single entity project or whether that's commissioned as a portfolio approach. And I suppose I'm going to say this, aren't I? But for those types of single projects or portfolios is to talk to organisations like ours at a very, very early stage to help with the due diligence in whether some of those sites, whether some of those parcels of land are deliverable against an economic and sustainable and social business case. And we, as I know others, are very geared up and very willing to do that. And to some extent, I almost put the procurement hurdle as the second hurdle to overcome, because if you can create a model and a solution on those assets, that's probably the first hurdle. The second then is to have a conversation around procurement, and for your public sector partner to be pragmatic and entrepreneurial around procurement models. And sometimes the words entrepreneurial and procurement don't necessarily go together, but I think they can. And that's what will get homes delivered working in partnership. The other side to that, we've spoken a lot about housing association and local authority assets, because it's, in some respects, that's what's good for us, is that we're not necessarily investing in securing sites in the first place. We're working on pre-existing controlled sites, and that's efficient for us. But the other option, of course, is coming together and working on a program jointly to acquire other sites, whether that's from a local authority or whether it's from the open market, and to deliver together. Because if you've delivered well on 10 to 15 homes on one site, on a complex development, it's very likely that you'll work well together on larger developments, and that for us is is a medium to long-term ambition. We're talking to another housing association at the moment about a complementary model, which is a combination of sites that we jointly bring to a joint venture structure and sites that we will bid for as a joint venture. So I think that would be my my 2 parts of advice: assets and procurement for public sector organisations. For other SMEs, I guess I would just repeat what I mentioned earlier, which is patience. It's patience around governance. It's certainly patience around planning, because planning has become more and more challenging over the last few years, and I think it's set to become even more challenging with the levelling up bill, where local councils aren't necessarily going to be held to account over their delivery targets, and very much be in the hands of local communities, where there's definitely a backdrop where sentiment is not in favour of house building. So that will in itself bring another challenge, and this just comes back to the patience point. So broaden your network, broaden your relationships, be speculative, utilize a network around you. We have a number of consultants, including your organisation, that support us at an early stage and will support us pro bono for the right scenario. So you can produce a huge amount with a relatively small investment on these types of sites, to be able to get to a point to say, we can do something here. We can deliver some good quality, sustainable, affordable homes.
Minimize the risk enough to be able to press the button.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, excellent. Thank you so much for your time. I think that summary brings our kind of session to a close. So Charlie, thank you so much for your time. There's been some really good nuggets of gold in there, and some really interesting ideas that of ways that I think public sector should be helping SMEs out more, considering all the rhetoric that we're hearing from central government, Homes England, Ministry of Housing, the GLA, how important small builders are, SMEs are to the makeup of our construction sector. I think definitely more can be done, because just having that conversation with you, I'm seeing how challenging that is, and you're way more patient than I am. But yeah, you're right. It's building up those relationships, doing the speculative work, delivering those projects really well, and then hopefully you're already in there for that next one. So the strategy on focusing on clients that have multiple sites, I think is probably the right way to go, because then you've put all that time into building that relationship, delivering with them, and then hopefully you can replicate it on the next schemes as they come in. But yeah, anything you'd like to finish off on, Charlie?
I don't think I've got too much more to add, other than to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and have a chat with you today, Gonzalo, and all the very best to you and your endeavours in the future.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And if our audience, or if any public sector entities or anyone would like to get in touch, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, a couple of ways. I mean, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or email me direct, which is charlie@helix.limited.
Cool. Well, we will add the contact details also to the podcast, so people can easily access that. But thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, we'll see everyone at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.